Hey guys, this is Miss Garner, and this video will be going over how to graph lines from a linear equation. So this very first slide here is just a recap from last week, going over slope, y-intercept, and how we wrote those equations. So remember, your slope, we use the variable m. This is always the number in front of x in the equation. The slope tells us the direction and steepness of a line. So remember, m equals rise over run, which is the same thing as saying how much y is changing over how much x is changing. The y-intercept, we use the variable b. So remember, that's the number that's at the back of your equation by itself. This tells us where the line crosses the y-axis. In 8th grade, all the lines we look at are straight lines, so they will always have the format y equals mx plus b. All right, the next slide, slide 2, gives you a recap or gives you the directions for how to graph a line from an equation. So if you get stuck or you forget what we're doing, this is a really good slide to go back to so that you can kind of remind yourself what you are doing. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on and just do some examples of these problems for you. Okay, so number 1, graph the equation y equals 2x minus 1. The first thing I'm going to do is figure out what my y-intercept and what my slope is. So slope m is going to equal 2, right? That's the number in front of x. If you don't have it as a fraction, you can always put a 1 on the bottom because 2 is the same thing as 2 divided by 1. My y-intercept is always the number that's by itself at the back. In this case, -1. Remember, if you have a minus sign in your equation, it has to go with the y-intercept. So in this case, it's a -1. So that's the first step, is figuring out what is your slope, what is your y-intercept. In order to draw a line, I have to have at least 2 points. All right, the first point I'm going to plot is my y-intercept. This is the easy one, right? We know exactly where the line crosses the y-axis. It's going to cross right here at -1. All right, so that's my first point that I'm going to plot is my y-intercept. All right, so I've already used b. Now to find my second point, I'm going to use m. So remember, slope is rise over run. So the top number is going to tell me how much I rise. So in this case, it's +2. So I know I'm going to go up 2. And then remember, the bottom number is the run. So it tells me how much I go sideways, over 1. All right, so a slope of 2 over 1 is the same thing as going up 2 over 1. Once I have that, I'm going to put my point right there. All right, 2 points is all you need. I like to use the line tool, which is right next to the drawing tool. If you click on that, you can draw a straight line through your points. So I'm going to go through the point, and then I want to extend it all the way through my graph. All right, so there is my line. So once again, the first point I plotted was my y-intercept at -1. And then I used my slope. I said from that point, I'm going to go up 2 over 1. And when I say over, I always mean to the right. Just like you read a book, you're going to go towards the right. You can double check yourself, right? If we draw that triangle in, we can double check that it's correct, right? We have a rise of 2, a run of 1. So that gives me my slope of 2 over 1. And I notice it's crossing at -1. So I can tell that that is correct for that equation. All right, here's example number 2. Y equals -1/3 x plus 4. So same thing, first thing I'm going to do is figure out what is my slope and y-intercept. So my slope is the number in front of x. So in this case, it's going to be a -1/3. My y-intercept, the b, is the number that's by itself. This time it's a +4, so +4. Okay, so that's your first step, is the slope is the number in front of x. The y-intercept is the number by itself at the back. The first point I'm going to plot is my y-intercept, right? That's the easy one. It tells you exactly where to put a point on your y-axis. So I'm going to put a point at 4. All right, so that's my first point. I just need one more to graph my line. Now I'm going to use my slope. So in this case, I have a negative slope. So the only difference here is instead of up, I'm going to go down. So remember, I'm going to go down however much the top number is, so down 1. And then the bottom number of my fraction, that's the run, right? That's how much I go over 3. So from the point I just plotted there, I'm going to go down 1 over 3. There's my next point. So I'm going to put my point there. And once again, now I'm going to use that line tool to go ahead and draw my line all the way through the graph. All right, so there's my answer. Once again, the first point I plotted was my y-intercept at +4. And then I used my slope. So -1/3 means down 1 over 3. So just a reminder, slope is equal to rise over run. All right, so that top number is telling you how much you rise. So you're either going up or down. And then the bottom number is telling you how much you run, how much you're going sideways. All right, we can double check ourselves again. Notice that this line is going downhill, right? That's a good thing. We have a negative slope. If I do my triangle here, I notice that my rise is 1 and my run is 3. So -1/3 slope, and it's crossing at 4. So I see that that matches up with the equation I was given. All right, example number 3. Y equals x minus 1. My slope is equal to 1, right? If there's no number in front of x, remember, it's just a single x. It's by itself. It's just 1. So it's a whole number. So that's the same thing as just saying 1 over 1, right? 1 divided by 1 is the same thing as 1. My y-intercept, the b, is -1. So remember that minus sign there has to go with it. So -1. The first point I will plot is my y-intercept, right? That's the easy one. So I'm going to start by putting a point at -1. Now I'm going to use my slope. It's positive, so I know I'm going to go up. So that means I'm going to go up 1 over 1 because my rise is 1 and my run is 1. So from the point, I'm going to go up 1 over 1 and put a point. Those are the only 2 points I need to connect my line, but I can do it as many times as I want. Right? From that point, up 1 over 1. That's another point on my line. Up 1 over 1. That's another point. Up 1 over 1. So you can see that I can continue doing my slope to create more and more points on my line. You only need 2 to make your line, but the more you have, sometimes the easier it is to draw that straight line. All right, so there's my answer for number 3. Y equals x minus 1. I have a slope of +1 and a y-intercept of -1. All right, one more example here. Number 4, y equals -2/3 x. So in this case, my slope m, it's the number in front of x, is going to be a -2/3. And then the b, there's no number at the back there. If there's no number, remember that this means it's crossing at 0. The way I like to remember this is if I asked you how old you are, you could say, I am 14 plus 0 years old, right? That's the same thing as just saying you're 14 years old. The plus 0 at the back isn't really changing anything. That's why we usually leave it off. So if there's nothing at the back, remember that just means b equals 0. So that's the first point I plot, right? That's the easy one. I know exactly where it's crossing the y-axis. It's happening right there at 0. Now I just need one more point. So I'm going to use my slope. It's negative, so I'm going to go down. And remember, the top number is how much you're going to go up or down. So down 2. And then the bottom number is how much you go over 3. So starting at the point there, I'm going to go down 2 over 3. There's my next point. I'm going to put my point there. And now I'm going to draw in my line. All right, so using that straight line tool, there we go. You notice that it's a downhill line, which is what we want. We have a negative slope, and it's crossing at 0. All right, so the big thing to remember when graphing these equations is always start with your y-intercept, plot that point, and then you're going to use your slope to find the next one.